He didn't say a word when she walked into his forge covered in road dust and dried blood. He just set down his hammer, crossed the floor in 3 steps, and stood between her and the men who followed her inside. "She's done traveling," he said. "Leave." They left. She stared at his back, this mountain blacksmith nobody in Thornwood respected, and felt something shift in her chest that scared her more than the men who'd been following her for 3 days. If this story already has your heart, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and ride with us to the end. The summer of 1887 hit Thornwood, Montana like a punishment. The creek was low, the grass was yellow. The kind of heat that made men short-tempered and decisions permanent settled over the valley like a wool blanket soaked in dust. Nobody came to Thornwood by choice. That was the first thing people said about the town. The second thing they said was that if you had any sense at all, you didn't stay. Margaret Avery had sense. She'd had it all her life, enough sense to stretch $1 until it wept, enough sense to keep her mouth shut in rooms full of dangerous men. Enough sense to know that the letter she'd received 3 weeks ago from her late husband's brother was almost certainly a lie. She came to Thornwood anyway, because sense and desperation are not the same thing, and Margaret Avery was desperately, bone-achingly out of options. She'd buried Thomas in April. Influenza. Fast and merciless the way God sometimes is. He'd been a good man, not rich, not ambitious, but steady in the way that mattered. The way that meant the lamp was always lit when she came home, and supper was never eaten without waiting for her to sit down first. She hadn't understood how much she'd built her whole life around that steadiness until it was gone, and she was standing in an empty house in Illinois with $42 a carpet bag and a letter from a man she'd never met. "Come to Thornwood," the letter said. "Thomas had a stake in a property out here. Come and collect what's owed to you. I'll make sure you're taken care of." She'd read that letter 6 times. She didn't trust it once. But $42 runs out, and a widow of 31 with no family and no trade had fewer choices than most people understood. So she came. She arrived on the noon stage, stepped down into the heat and the dust and the smell of horse and iron, and looked around for a man named Gerald Avery. Gerald Avery was not there. What was there? A main street, baking under a white sky, a saloon already loud at noon, 3 men sitting outside the general store who all stopped talking. The moment she stepped off the stage, and a handwritten note tucked under the wheel of the post office door, addressed to her in handwriting that was not the same as the letter she'd received. "Sorry, miss. Change of plans. Ask around for the Avery property deed at the land office. Tell them who you are." She asked. The land office was run by a man named Hector Pruitt. Soft hands, hard eyes, a smile that came and went like weather. "Mrs. Avery," he said, folding his hands on the desk with the careful politeness of a man who has practiced it until it looks natural. "I'm afraid there's a complication." "What kind of complication?" "The property your husband held a stake in, it's been attached to a debt claim, filed last month, before your arrival." She kept her voice level. "Filed by whom?" "A business association. Legitimate creditors." He opened a drawer, pulled out a sheaf of papers, and laid them in front of her like he was doing her a kindness. "The stake can be released, of course, if the debt's cleared." She looked at the number on the paper. $380. She had 19 left after the stage fare. "That's not a complication," she said. "That's a trap." Hector Pruitt's smile didn't change. "I understand it's upsetting, ma'am, but the law's the law." She picked up the papers and walked out. She stood on the boardwalk in the white noon heat and breathed through her nose, and did not cry, because crying was a luxury she hadn't been able to afford since April, and she wasn't going to start now. The 3 men outside the general store were watching her. She didn't look at them. She started walking, no direction in mind, just movement, because standing still felt too much like surrender, and that's when she noticed the building at the far end of the street. No sign above the door. Just the sound of a hammer, steady and rhythmic in the heat, and the smell of hot iron and coal smoke, and an open door dark enough that it looked cool from the outside. She walked toward it the way a person walks toward water in a desert, not deciding to exactly. Just going. She stepped inside. The forge was alive, orange and amber, and the deep red of working coal, and standing in front of it, back to the door, was the largest man she'd ever seen. Not large the way Hector Pruitt's associates were large, which was the largeness of threat and appetite. Large the way old timber is large, solid through to the center, grown slow and without apology. He had his shirt rolled to the elbows. He was working a piece of iron on the anvil, shaping it with a focus so complete that he didn't hear her come in. She watched him for a moment. She didn't know why. Then boots scraped the boardwalk outside, 2 pairs moving fast, and without thinking, she stepped further into the shop, and her back found the wall beside the door, just as the 2 men from the general store ducked inside after her. The hammer stopped. The blacksmith turned around. He was somewhere in his late 30s, with dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been hit more than once, and had decided not to care. His eyes were gray, not the sharp gray of winter sky, but the flat, patient gray of riverstone, and they moved first to her, then to the men in his doorway, and then back to her. Something passed across his face that she couldn't name. "She with you?" the taller of the 2 men asked him. "Yes," the blacksmith said. No hesitation, no qualification. Just the word, flat and final, dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The man blinked. "We just wanted to talk to her." "She's done being talked to." He set the hammer down on the anvil deliberately, slowly, making the iron ring, and looked at them with those river stone eyes. "You need something forged, I'm here until sundown. Otherwise, the door's behind you." The 2 men looked at each other. They left. The blacksmith didn't watch them go. He picked up his hammer and turned back to the forge like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just placed himself between her and 2 men who outweighed her by a combined 250 pounds. Margaret stood very still. "Thank you," she finally said. He didn't turn around. "I'm Margaret Avery." A pause. The hammer kept moving. "I know." She blinked. "How do you know?" "Small town." He turned the iron, examined it, turned it back. "You got off the noon stage, went to the land office, came out looking like someone had told you your horse was dead." He glanced over his shoulder briefly. "Wasn't hard to track. You were watching me. Noticed you." He turned back to the forge. Different thing. She didn't know what to do with that, so she filed it away and looked around the shop instead. It was orderly, in the way that working spaces become, when one person has spent years alone in them, everything worn to the shape of his hands, everything in a place that made sense only if you understood how he worked. "What's your name?" she asked. Another pause. "Cole Whitfield." "Mr. Whitfield, I need help." I gathered. "Not that kind." She took a breath. "I need someone who knows this town. Someone who isn't connected to Hector Pruitt or whatever arrangement he's running out of that land office." She hesitated. "The man who sent for me, Gerald Avery. Do you know him?" Cole Whitfield set down his hammer and turned around fully for the first time. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's measuring, not unkindly, but without softening it either. Straight on. "Gerald Avery left Thornwood 2 weeks ago," he said. "Heard he collected some money and rode north. Don't know more than that." She felt the floor shift slightly under her. "He's gone." "Yes, ma'am." She sat down on the nearest bench, not gracefully, just down, because her legs made the decision before her pride could object. Then the letter was bait. She said it out loud, because saying it out loud made it real, and she needed it to be real so she could start figuring out what to do next, instead of just standing in the wreckage of it. "Pruitt used Gerald to get me here. Now he has me in his land office with a debt I can't pay on a property that may not even exist. That's about the shape of it." Cole Whitfield's voice was not gentle, but it was not unkind either. It was the voice of a man who told the truth because he thought lying was an insult to people's intelligence. "Pruitt's been running that scheme for about a year. Gets widows and heirs to come in on property claims. Attaches debt. Acquires the stake when they can't pay." He folded his arms. "Most people can't pay. And nobody's stopped him. Nobody's been able to prove it yet. He keeps the papers clean." But you know, most of the town knows. Something flickered in those gray eyes, something that looked almost like anger held a long time. Knowing and proving aren't the same. She looked at him. Why are you telling me this? He was quiet for a moment. Because you asked, he said. And because those men who followed you in here, the one in the gray hat works for Pruitt. He was watching you from the moment you stepped off the stage. He looked at her steadily. You're not the first woman Pruitt's done this to, but most of them came alone and left quick. You came alone, and you sat down. I sat down because my legs gave out. I know. And for just a moment, barely a second there and gone, something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face. Still counts. Margaret looked at this man, this blacksmith who lived at the edge of a dishonest town, and hammered iron alone in the heat, and told the truth, like it cost him nothing, and made a decision the way she made most decisions, which was quickly and without asking permission from anyone, least of all herself. I need to find out if that property stake is real, she said. And I need to find Gerald Avery. And I need to get Hector Pruitt's name on a piece of paper that a federal marshal will take seriously. She met his eyes. I don't have money to pay you. I don't have anything to offer. But I'm not leaving Thornwood until this is done, and I would rather not do it entirely alone. Cole Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. You got somewhere to sleep tonight? He asked. Not yet. He nodded once, slow, like that settled something he'd been deciding. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house on Crane Street. Tell her I sent you. She won't take money from you until you've got it to give. He picked his hammer back up. Come back tomorrow morning. Early. I'll take you up to see the property line. Why would you do that? He turned back to the forge. His voice, when it came, was even and quiet. Because Pruitt's been making this town ugly for a year, he said, and I'm tired of watching it. She stood, picked up her carpet bag, and moved toward the door. She stopped in the frame and looked back at him. This mountain of a man with riverstone eyes and soot on his forearms, and a hammer in his hand. Mr. Whitfield, she said. He didn't turn around. Ma'am. Those men who followed me, will they come back? A pause. The hammer rang once against the iron. Not tonight, he said. She believed him. She didn't entirely know why, but she did. She stepped out into the white summer heat and walked toward Crane Street, and behind her, the hammer kept its rhythm steady and certain, the way very few things in her life had ever been. She didn't sleep well that night. Mrs. Henderson was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who took one look at Margaret's face and didn't ask a single question, just showed her to a room with a real bed and a window that caught the evening breeze and left a pitcher of cold water on the washstand without being asked. Cole sent you, she said at the door. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Henderson nodded like that explained everything. Room's yours as long as you need it. Breakfast is at 6. Don't be late. Eggs, don't wait. After the old woman's footsteps faded down the hall, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and laid out the facts the way she used to lay out fabric before cutting, carefully measuring twice before committing to a line. Fact. Gerald Avery had used her husband's name to lure her here and had collected money from Pruitt for doing it. Fact. The debt attached to the property stake was fabricated. It had to be because Thomas had no debts she didn't know about, and the amount was too precise to be coincidence. Fact. Hector Pruitt had been running this scheme for a year, which meant he had practice, which meant he had made mistakes he hadn't noticed yet, which meant there were paper trails he thought were clean that were not. Fact. Cole Whitfield had not asked for anything in return. That last one she turned over the longest. She had spent the past 3 weeks accepting charity from neighbors who wanted something back. The sympathy that came with strings, the help that came with the unspoken suggestion that a widow alone was a problem that needed solving, preferably by attaching herself to someone who could solve it. She had learned to read the math behind every kindness. Cole Whitfield's kindness didn't have math she could find. That either meant he was more dangerous than she'd assessed, or it meant he was the rarest thing in the world. She didn't know which yet, but she was going to find out. She was at the forge at first light. Cole was already working. She suspected he had been for hours, because the coal was well established, and there was a finished piece cooling on the workbench that hadn't been there the day before. He had a pot of coffee on the small iron stove in the corner, 2 cups beside it. He poured one without asking and set it on the edge of the anvil within her reach. She picked it up. Strong black, no apology. "Sleep?" he asked, without looking up from the piece he was examining. "Some. Pruitt will know you didn't leave last night. He'll try the direct approach today." He set the piece down. "A man named Aldous Crane will come to find you. He'll say he can help. He works for Pruitt, but calls himself independent." He finally looked up. "Don't believe him." "How do you know he'll come today?" "Because that's the pattern." Cole picked up a set of files and began working the edge of the piece. "First day he sends men to rattle you. Second day he sends someone friendly. Third day, if you're still here, Pruitt comes himself." "And what happens when Pruitt comes himself?" "Depends on who you are." He glanced at her brief and direct. "Most women are gone by then." "I'm not most women." "No," he said, returning to his work. "I noticed that." She watched his hands the way they moved over the iron with a precision that didn't match the roughness of the work. He wasn't a man who'd been defeated by his life. He was a man who'd decided something a long time ago about who he was going to be, and had spent every day since then being exactly that. She wanted to ask him what that decision was. She didn't yet. "Tell me about the property," she said instead. "What do you know about the land Thomas staked a claim in?" Cole set down the file. He looked at her for a moment, considering something, and then walked to the back of the shop and pulled a rolled paper from a shelf. He spread it on the workbench between them. It was a hand-drawn map of the valley and the mountain above it, detailed enough to show creek lines, property borders, elevation changes. "This," he said, touching a section in the upper valley, "is where the Avery stake was filed. 12 acres registered in your husband's name in 1884. She leaned over the map. "That's real, it's actually recorded." "At the Territorial Land Office in Helena." "Yes." His finger moved to a different section adjacent and larger. "This is what Pruitt wants. The Avery stake sits on the water source for the upper range. Whoever controls these 12 acres controls the water for 3 times as much grazing land." He looked up at her. "It's worth considerably more than $380. Margaret felt something cold move through her despite the heat. "He doesn't want money," she said. "Never did. The debt claim is just the mechanism. If you can't pay the stake transfers, if you can pay—" He paused. "There are other mechanisms." "How long have you known about this?" Something moved in his expression. "Long enough." "Why haven't you done anything?" The question landed harder than she intended. She saw at the slight tightening around his eyes the way his jaw set. "I'm a blacksmith," he said. "In a town where Pruitt has 3 county commissioners in his pocket, and a lawyer who charges $100 to file a complaint." He folded the map back into its roll carefully. "I've been watching. I've been waiting for someone with a legal claim and enough reason to fight." He looked at her. "You're the first one who didn't run." "Because I have nowhere to run to," she said honestly. He nodded, slowly, like that was the right answer. "Then let's go look at 12 acres of mountain," he said, "and figure out what we're actually dealing with." The trail up to the upper valley was steep and dry, the summer heat pressing down on the mountain like a hand. Cole rode a heavy roan that matched him unhurried and solid. He'd found her a steady bay mare from the livery without commentary or price negotiation. Simply told the livery owner the horse was needed, and the man had handed over the reins. She filed that away too, that away. They rode mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, the kind of silence that belonged to people who didn't need to fill space with words to prove they were present. The Avery stake was marked with boundary posts, weathered but standing, and it was immediately obvious why Pruitt wanted it. A spring-fed creek ran through the northeast corner of the property, cold and clear, even in the summer drought, feeding down into the upper valley. The grass around it was greener than anything she'd seen since leaving Illinois. The cattle she could see in the distance, grazing on the dry hillside, were moving toward it. "Those cattle," she said. "Whose range?" "3 different ranchers, all of them currently paying Pruitt a grazing fee for water access." Cole's voice was level. "An arrangement that would end immediately if the Avery stake was under legal ownership, and the owner chose to grant access directly." She looked at the water running clear over the stones, and understood with sudden completeness the whole shape of it. "He's charging them to use water that isn't his to begin with," she said. "Has been for 2 years, after your husband stopped coming out to check the claim." Cole looked at the creek. "Your husband was a patient man." She felt the ache move through her quick and private. "Yes, he was." Cole didn't say anything. He just gave her a moment without making a production of it, without looking at her while she took it. Then, "We should get back before noon. Crane will come looking, and I'd rather you not be alone when he does." She nodded and turned her horse. They rode back down the mountain in the same quiet they'd come up in, and she thought about Thomas. Patient, steady. Thomas, who had filed a land claim in 1884 and never told her about it, probably because he'd been planning it as a surprise, the way he planned most good things quietly and without announcement until the moment they were real. She thought about the fact that Hector Pruitt had been charging men to use Thomas's water for 2 years. She thought about the fact that a blacksmith at the edge of a crooked town had been waiting alone for someone with enough reason to fight. She looked at Cole Whitfield's back as he rode ahead of her, straight, unhurried, certain, and felt something settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the land, or the water, or the scheme. She wasn't sure what to do with it. She filed it away with the other things she wasn't sure about yet. She'd figure it out. She always did. Aldous Crane came at 9:30. Margaret was sitting on the bench outside the forge, drinking the last of the morning coffee, when she saw him coming down the main street with the particular walk of a man who has decided he is doing someone a favor. Pressed shirt, clean boots, a smile already arranged on his face before he was close enough for it to mean anything. Cole was inside working. She could hear the hammer. She didn't go get him. Crane stopped in front of her, tipped his hat with the practiced grace of a man who had tipped it at many women in difficult situations, and said, "Mrs. Avery, I'm glad I found you. My name is Aldous Crane. I'm an independent property consultant, and I believe I might be able to help you with your situation." "My situation?" she said. "The debt claim on the Avery stake. It's an unfortunate business. I've seen Pruitt's office make errors before. Clerical issues mostly." He sat down on the far end of the bench without being invited, which told her everything about how he conducted business. "I have some influence with the land office. I believe I could get that claim reduced, perhaps significantly." "How significantly?" "Perhaps eliminated." He spread his hands in a gesture of generous helplessness. "In exchange for a reasonable arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "A transfer of interest in the property. Partial, you'd retain a share, 30%. The remaining 70 would pass to my clients." He smiled. "It's more than you'd walk away with if Pruitt forecloses, which he will do within the week if the debt isn't cleared." She looked at him for a long moment. "Who are your clients?" she asked. "I'm not at liberty." "Are they Hector Pruitt?" The smile didn't waver. He was practiced. "My clients are a business association with significant interests in the valleys, Mr. Crane." She set down her coffee cup. "I rode up to that property this morning. I saw the creek. I saw whose cattle were using it." She met his eyes. "I also know what 12 acres of spring-fed water rights are worth in a drought year in this valley, and it is considerably more than 30% of anything you're prepared to offer me." She stood. "Tell Mr. Pruitt I'll be in touch when I'm ready to have a real conversation." Crane's smile finally shifted not into anger, but into something colder, more considered. He stood as well. "Mrs. Avery," he said, and the warmth was gone from his voice entirely now. "You're a widow alone in a town you don't know, with no money and no legal representation. I'm trying to give you a way out of this that doesn't end badly." "I appreciate the warning," she said. "It's very honest of you. He looked at her for another second. Then he put his hat back on, nodded once, formal final, and walked back up the street. The hammer inside the forge had stopped. Cole appeared in the doorway behind her, wiping his hands on a cloth, watching Crane's retreating back. "He threatened you?" he asked. He implied it. She picked up her coffee cup. "I told him to pass a message to Pruitt." Cole was quiet for a moment. "That moves the timeline up." "I know. Pruitt won't wait until day 3 now." He looked at her straight on the way he always did, like he didn't see the point of looking anywhere else when he was talking to someone. "You understand what you're doing." "I'm making myself inconvenient," she said. "Yes, I understand." He nodded, slowly. "Then we need to move faster than I planned." He stepped back into the forge. "Come inside. I need to show you something." She followed him. He went to the shelf where he'd pulled the map the day before and reached behind it, drawing out a flat tin box that looked like it hadn't been moved in some time. He set it on the workbench and opened it. Inside were papers. Letters. What looked like hand-copied land office records. "I've been collecting this for 8 months, he said. Every time Pruitt transferred a stake, every debt claim he filed, every name on every document. He laid several sheets out on the bench between them. 12 cases, same pattern every time. But none of them had a clean enough legal claim to take to a federal marshal, because all the original parties had already signed transfers." She looked at the papers, looked at the names, women mostly, 1 or 2 men. All of them listed as the original claimants, all of them with signatures on transfer documents. "Did they sign willingly?" she asked. "Most of them signed because they believed they had no choice." His jaw was tight. "Pruitt is careful. He doesn't threaten. He just closes every door until the only one left open is the one he built." She understood that. She had spent the last 24 hours feeling every door in Thornwood and finding them all shut. She looked at the papers again, looked at the dates. "The first case," she said. 1886. A woman named Ruth Calloway." She looked up. "What happened to her?" Something moved in Cole's face. Fast, and then gone. "She left town," he said. "I don't know where she went." The way he said it told her there was more to that answer. She filed it away for later. "These records," she said. "The originals are in the land office in Helena. Some of them. Some are in Pruitt's office." "Then we need someone who can access Helena." She straightened. "A lawyer, or a federal connection." "There's a circuit court judge who comes through the valley twice a year," Cole said. "Next session is in 6 weeks." He paused. "Pruitt knows the schedule. He'll have the Avery stake transferred well before then. Then we need to stop the transfer." She looked at him. "Can a transfer be legally contested before it's completed?" "If you have grounds and a licensed attorney willing to file." "Is there an attorney in Thornwood?" "One." Cole's voice was flat. "He shares an office with the land office." Of course he did. Margaret pressed her fingers to the edge of the workbench and thought. She thought the way she'd learned to think in the past 3 weeks, not from where she was, which was nowhere good, but from where she needed to end up working backward until she found the path. "The ranchers," she said. Cole looked at her. "The 3 ranchers whose cattle are using the creek," she said. "Pruitt is charging them for water access. If I hold the legal claim on the Avery stake, and I offer them direct access, no fee or a fair one, they have a reason to want my claim to stand." She met his eyes. "Do they know the land Pruitt is charging them to use isn't his?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how much they've thought about it." "Then we need to go tell them." She picked up her carpetbag and found a piece of paper and the short pencil she kept in the inner pocket. "What are their names?" he told her. She wrote them down. "I'll go to them today," she said. "I'll take you." He said it without deliberation, just a fact the way he stated most things. She looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know the land." He closed the tin box and put it back on the shelf. "And they know me." They'll listen faster if I'm there. She didn't argue. She was learning that Cole Whitfield didn't offer things he didn't mean, which meant arguing with his offers was the same as arguing with a fence post, possible, but purposeless. They went that afternoon. The first rancher was a wide, sun-beaten man named George Halter, who met them at his gate with a rifle not quite pointed at anything and eyes that had decided not to trust anything until it proved itself. Cole said his name. Halter lowered the rifle a quarter inch, not all the way, but enough. "What's this about?" he asked. "Water," Cole said. Halter's eyes moved to Margaret. She introduced herself, told him what she'd found at the land office, told him about the creek, and the stake, and the 12 acres. She told him the number Pruitt was charging him for access to water that wasn't Pruitt's to sell. Halter was quiet for a long time. "You got proof of this?" he asked. "I have the original territorial registration in my husband's name," she said. "I have the deed number. I have the filing date." She paused. "What I need from you is a signed statement that you've been paying Hector Pruitt for creek access on the upper range, that you believed you were paying the legal property owner." Halter looked at Cole. "This true. The water doesn't belong to Pruitt." "Never did," Cole said. Another long silence. Halter scratched his jaw, looked at his land, looked back at them. "He'll make trouble," Halter said. "He'll make trouble anyway," Margaret said. "The difference is whether you're on the right side of it when it's over." Halter signed. The second rancher was a younger man named Dix, who'd been quietly furious about Pruitt's fees for months and signed before Margaret finished explaining. The third was harder. His name was Abe Connolly, and he was Pruitt's cousin by marriage, which he told them the moment they rode up, standing in front of his barn with his arms crossed and his chin out. "I know why you're here," he said. "And I'll tell you the same thing I told the last person who tried to make trouble over that creek. I pay a fair rate, and I keep my head down, and I don't involve myself in other people's quarrels." "This isn't someone else's quarrel," Margaret said. "You've been paying for water that was owed to my husband's estate. That makes you a witness to fraud whether you want to be or not." "That's a matter of legal opinion. It's a matter of public record in Helena." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Connolly, I understand your position. Pruitt is family by marriage and he's your neighbor. But when the federal marshal comes into this valley, and he will come because I am not leaving until he does, he'll ask every person in this valley what they knew and when they knew it." She let that sit for a moment. "A signed statement from you saying you paid in good faith and were misled protects you. Silence doesn't." Connolly uncrossed his arms. He looked at Cole. "You're really part of this?" "I am," Cole said. Connolly looked at the ground, looked at his barn, looked like a man doing arithmetic about his own life and not entirely liking the numbers. "He'll know I signed," he said. "Yes," Margaret said. "He will." A long pause. "You really going to bring a marshal in here?" Connolly asked. "I'm going to try," she said. "I won't lie to you about the odds, but yes, that's what I'm going to do." Connolly went inside and came back with a pen and signed the paper on the flat of his forearm without a table to lean on. He handed it back to her without looking at either of them. "Don't tell Pruitt I was last," he said. "Man's got a temper about order." "I won't tell him anything about you," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Connolly." They rode back down toward Thornwood in the long amber light of late afternoon, and the 3 signed statements were folded in the inner pocket of Margaret's carpetbag alongside the deed number, and Cole's 8 months of collected records. And for the first time since she'd stepped off the noon stage 2 days ago, she felt the shape of something that wasn't just survival. She felt the shape of a fight she might actually win. "You were good in there," Cole said. She glanced at him. He was looking ahead at the trail, not at her. "With Connolly," he added. "The part about the marshal, you didn't oversell it." "I didn't want to lie to him." "Most people would have." "Most people lie when they're scared," she said. "I find the truth works better. It's harder to keep track of." A silence. Then quietly, what she was beginning to recognize as the very beginning of one of his rare almost smiles. "That's a practical reason to be honest," he said. "I'm a practical person." "I noticed." She looked at his profile, the straight line of his jaw, the way he rode like he'd been on horseback so long, it had become part of how he moved through the world, and thought about what Mrs. Henderson had said that morning over eggs. She'd said it quietly in the way of a woman depositing information without requiring a response. "Cole Whitfield is the best man in this valley. Anybody who knows him knows that. The trouble is, he doesn't know it himself." Margaret hadn't asked why. She was beginning to understand without asking. They were 2 streets from the forge when the boy came running. He couldn't have been more than 12, skinny barefoot, the kind of fast that comes from a lifetime of running errands, and he skidded to a stop in front of Cole's horse with his hands on his knees and his chest heaving. "Mr. Whitfield," he gasped. "Mr. Pruitt's men. They went into the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson, she told them the lady wasn't there, but they didn't believe her, and one of them went through her room." Margaret's hand tightened on the reins. "Anyone hurt?" Cole asked. His voice was completely calm. "No, sir. Mrs. Henderson hit one of them with a soup ladle." "Good for her." Cole dismounted in a single motion, handed his reins to the boy. "Take them both to the livery. Tell Anderson I'll settle up later." He looked at Margaret, who was already down from her own horse. "Your carpetbag." "I have it." She'd had it on her arm all day. He nodded. "Come on." They went to the boarding house on foot. Mrs. Henderson met them in the front hall. A small woman vibrating with indignation, a soup ladle still in her right hand. "The nerve," she said before either of them spoke. "The absolute nerve of those men, walking into my establishment, going through a guest's belongings." She fixed Cole with an eye that had clearly been formidable for several decades. "I told you last year, Pruitt was going to go too far." "You did?" Cole agreed. "What did they take?" "Nothing worth taking." She glanced at Margaret. "I moved your trunk to my room this morning, feeling something was coming." She said it plainly without drama, a woman who had lived long enough to trust her instincts and had stopped apologizing for it. "Whatever was in it is safe." Margaret let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." "Don't thank me. Get that man out of my town." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. "Supper's in an hour. Wash your hands." Margaret looked at Cole. He was looking at the front door jaw set, working through something in his head. "He's moving faster than the pattern," he said. "He sent men here while we were with the ranchers, which means someone told him where we were going." "Connolly," Margaret said. "Maybe." He looked at her. "Or someone from the livery saw us ride out and put it together." He shook his head once sharp. "Either way, he knows you're not running, and now he knows you've been talking to the ranchers." "So what does he do next?" Cole's gray eyes were steady. "He comes himself." She had expected that answer. She didn't flinch from it. "Then we need to be ready," she said. "We need more than ready." He looked at her carpetbag. "The records you have, the deed number, the statements, none of it means anything without someone who can take it to Helena." "A rider," she said. "We need someone we trust to get to the Territorial Land Office." Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a man," he said slowly. "He runs the postal route between here and Helena. Name's Birch. He owes me a debt, not money the other kind." He looked at her. "If I ask him, he'll go. Tonight." "Ask him," she said. He nodded and reached for his hat. "Cole." She said his name and he stopped. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say when she started saying it. "I need to know something." She kept her voice level. "The woman on the papers, Ruth Calloway, 1886. She watched his face. "What actually happened to her?" The silence lasted 2 full seconds. In a man who spoke as sparingly as Cole Whitfield, that was a long time. "She was my sister," he said. "Half-sister, different fathers." He looked at the wall, not at her, which was the only time she'd ever seen him look at anything other than what he was talking to. She came to Thornwood the same way you did. Letter, property claim, debt. His jaw worked. She signed the transfer. She didn't know she had a choice. By the time I got back from a job in the North Valley, she was already gone. He paused. I haven't been able to find her. Everything landed differently now. Every piece of it, the 8 months of records, the waiting the moment in the forge, when he'd stepped between her and those two men without hesitation, the map he'd been keeping on a shelf. She understood now what she was standing in the middle of. You've been waiting for someone with a valid claim, she said, quietly, not accusing, just naming it. Yes. He looked at her now, and there was something in it that was the closest she'd seen him come to asking for something. I should have told you that at the start. Why didn't you? Because I didn't want you to feel like a tool, he said. And then I didn't know how to bring it up once I'd waited too long. He looked at her straight. I'm telling you now. Whatever you decide to do with that is your choice. She thought about Thomas and patience and property claims made in quiet faith that things would come right. She thought about a woman who'd come to Thornwood alone and signed away what was hers because she didn't know she didn't have to. She thought about a man who'd been carrying that for 8 months and hadn't told her until she asked him directly because he was trying in his clumsy, honest ironworker way not to use her. Go find Birch, she said. Send him tonight. Cole put his hat on, nodded once. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said, because Mrs. Henderson was apparently contagious. Just find your sister. He left. She stood in the hallway of the boarding house with her carpet bag on her arm and her 3 signed statements and her dead husband's deed number and a fight in front of her that she hadn't come to Thornwood looking for. But she was here, and Hector Pruitt had made the mistake that careful men sometimes made when they had been winning for long enough. He had started to believe the winning was permanent. It wasn't. She'd make sure of it. She washed her hands and went to supper. Pruitt came on the 3rd morning. Margaret was at the forge. She had started going there early enough that Cole had stopped commenting on it and simply begun leaving a 2nd cup beside the coffee pot as a matter of course. It was a small thing. She noticed it every morning and didn't say anything about it because some things are understood better when they're left unspoken. She was reviewing the copies Cole had made of Pruitt's transfer records when she heard the boots on the boardwalk outside, more than 2 pairs, measured and deliberate, the walk of men who want to be heard coming. Cole heard it too. His hammer slowed, then stopped. Hector Pruitt stepped into the forge like a man entering a room he already owned. He was smaller than she'd expected, medium height, neatly dressed with the careful grooming of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. 2 men stood behind him in the doorway. Not Crane. Bigger than Crane. He looked at Margaret first, then at Cole, then at the papers on the workbench, which he couldn't read from where he stood, but whose presence clearly registered. Mrs. Avery, he said. I'm glad I finally have the chance to speak with you directly. I apologize for the confusion at the land office. These matters can be communicated poorly by staff. He smiled, warm, practiced, utterly without reach. I'd like to offer you a resolution. You offered me one through Mr. Crane, she said. I declined it. Mr. Crane can be heavy-handed. I prefer to handle sensitive matters personally. He moved toward the workbench with the ease of a man accustomed to taking up space in other people's rooms. The debt claim can be restructured. I'm prepared to offer you a very fair... Mr. Pruitt? Her voice was quiet. I sent a writer to Helena 2 nights ago, with a copy of the original territorial registration on the Avery stake and signed statements from 3 ranchers who've been paying you for creek access on property that isn't yours. She watched his face. The writer should arrive today, possibly this morning. The warmth in Pruitt's expression didn't disappear. It crystallized the same temperature but suddenly hard all the way through. That's a serious accusation, he said. It's a documented one. She folded her hands on the workbench. I'm not interested in a resolution that involves transferring any portion of that stake to you or your associates. I'm interested in the full legal recognition of my husband's claim and a formal inquiry into the 12 cases in your land office that follow the same pattern. She paused. Those are my terms. The silence in the forge was the kind that has weight. One of the men in the doorway shifted. Cole didn't move at all, but something about the quality of his stillness changed the way a held breath is different from a restful one. Pruitt looked at Cole. You're part of this. I am, Cole said. Same words he'd said to Connolly, same flat certainty. You're a blacksmith, Pruitt said. Not quite contempt too controlled for that, but the shape of it. I am, Cole said again. And you're a land agent who's been stealing water rights from widows for 2 years. We can both be what we are. Something moved in Pruitt's jaw. He looked back at Margaret. Mrs. Avery, he said, and the warmth was entirely gone now, replaced by something that had probably always been underneath it. You came to Thornwood with $19. You have no legal representation. You have no residence. The statements you collected from those ranchers will be contested in any local proceeding. He let each point land before moving to the next. What you have is a deed number and a blacksmith. That is not enough to beat me in this valley. I don't need to beat you in this valley, she said. I need to beat you in Helena. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he put his hat back on, nodded with the formal courtesy of a man filing something away for later, and walked out. His men followed. The sound of their boots faded down the boardwalk. Cole let out a breath. He's going to move on the transfer today, he said. Whatever filing he can push through locally before Helena responds. Can he complete it without my signature? Not on the original claim, but he can file a foreclosure on the debt which triggers a different process. He set his hammer down and looked at her directly. We need to slow him down. How? There's one person in this town who can file a legal objection to a foreclosure proceeding. He paused. Judge Alderman. He's not Pruitt's man. He's not anyone's man, which is why Pruitt works around him instead of through him. But he'd need cause to intervene. Then I'll give him cause. She picked up the papers. Where does he live? Cole took her. Judge Alderman was 71 years old, nearly deaf in one ear, and possessed of the particular sharpness that sometimes lives in men who have spent decades listening to people lie to them. He heard Margaret's account standing in his front doorway, because he'd decided before she finished the first sentence that this wasn't a conversation for the porch, and had already stepped back to let them in before she asked. He read the records Cole had collected. He read the 3 statements. He looked at the deed number and cross-referenced it against a territorial directory he pulled from a shelf behind his desk with the ease of a man who knows exactly where every book in his house lives. He was quiet for a long time. The filing in Helena, he said finally. When did you send it? 2 nights ago, Margaret said. The writer is Horace Birch. Postal route. Good man. Alderman closed the directory. I can issue a temporary stay on any local foreclosure proceeding pending response from the territorial office. It won't hold long, 10 days, maybe 12, but it'll keep Pruitt from completing a transfer while your filing is in transit. He looked at her over the top of his glasses. You understand that if Helena doesn't move quickly, or if there's a problem with your filing, the stay expires and Pruitt can proceed. I understand. You understand also that issuing this stay will make me unpopular with certain people in this town. Yes. He looked at her, looked at Cole, looked back at her. Your husband filed that claim in good faith, he said, and Pruitt has been running this scheme since before most people in this town noticed or were willing to say so. He pulled a sheet of paper from his desk drawer. Hand me that pen. The stay was signed by 9 in the morning. They were back on the main street by 9:15, and by 9:30, Margaret could tell by the way 2 of Pruitt's men were watching the judge's office from across the street that word had already traveled. He knows, Cole said. He'll know the stay came from Alderman. He can't touch the judge directly. She thought through it as she walked. What he'll do is find another pressure point. She was right. She just didn't know which one until Mrs. Henderson met them at the boarding house door at noon with her arms crossed and her mouth in a line. 2 men came to the Mercantile this morning, she said without preamble. Told Miller you were a fraud, that you're not Thomas Avery's widow, that you came here to run a scheme of your own. She looked at Margaret with eyes that had made their judgment and were just reporting it. Miller told them to buy something or leave, but they said it loud enough for people to hear it. Margaret felt it move through her, the particular cold of having your name dirtied in a room you weren't in to defend it. "He's attacking the credibility of the witness," Cole said quietly beside her. "Yes." She breathed through it, steadied. "He can't stop the stay. He can't complete the transfer, so he makes me someone nobody in this town will believe." "What do you need?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Margaret looked at her. "Do you have Thomas's letter? The one that was addressed to me at the post office door." "I kept it," Mrs. Henderson said, and went inside to get it. Cole looked at her. "Why does that matter?" "Because the handwriting isn't Gerald Avery's," she said. "I've been carrying that letter for 3 weeks, and I know Thomas's handwriting, and I know Gerald's signature from the property deed correspondence Thomas kept. The letter that brought me here was written by a third party." She met his eyes. "If Pruitt used someone else to write that letter, there's a person in this town who knows how to forge documents." Cole went very still. "The transfer documents," he said, "for the 12 cases. If they were signed under duress or not signed at all and forged after the fact—" She stopped. "Let it sit between them. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal fraud." Mrs. Henderson came back with the letter. Margaret took it, read it again carefully. She had almost memorized it by now, and then looked at Cole. "You know everyone in this town," she said. "Who is Pruitt's closest associate, not Crane? Someone who does the detailed work, the paperwork," Cole thought. He thought the way he did everything without rushing it. "A man named Sellers," he said. "Came to town about 2 years ago. Works out of the back of the land office. Nobody knows exactly what he does." "He's the forger," Margaret said. "Or he knows who is." "You can't prove that." "Not yet." She folded the letter carefully and put it back in her carpet bag. "But Sellers doesn't know what we have and what we don't, and frightened men make mistakes." She looked at Cole. "Can you get me in a room with him?" "Margaret." He said her name with a particular weight the first time he'd used it without the misses, and neither of them acknowledged it, but it was there. "What are you planning?" "Nothing dishonest," she said. "I'm going to tell him the truth. I'm going to tell him exactly how much trouble he's in, and let him decide whether he'd rather be Pruitt's associate or the territorial court's witness." She looked at Cole steadily. "He'll want a way out. Everyone in a scheme like this wants a way out. They just need someone to show them the door." Cole looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way he sometimes did when she said something that landed differently than he'd expected, with a kind of attention that was quieter than surprise and more serious than admiration, like he was filing it somewhere careful. "I know where he takes his lunch," Cole said finally. Sellers was a thin man, mid-40s, with ink-stained fingers, and the eyes of someone who had been nervous for so long it had become his resting expression. He was sitting alone at the far end of the saloon's lunch counter when they came in, and he saw them before they reached him and started to stand up. "Sit down, Mr. Sellers," Margaret said pleasantly, and something in her voice made him sit. She sat on the stool beside him. Cole stood behind her, not threatening, just present the way a mountain is present. "I'm Margaret Avery," she said. "I think you know who I am." Sellers looked at his plate. "I don't know what you think I have the original letter that was sent to bring me to Thornwood," she said. "I have a rider in Helena right now with 12 case files and 3 signed witness statements. I have a stay issued by Judge Alderman this morning." She kept her voice conversational. "And I have a very strong suspicion that the transfer signatures on at least several of those 12 cases are not what they claim to be." Sellers's fork had stopped moving. "Mr. Sellers." She leaned slightly toward him. "I don't want you. I want Pruitt. The difference between being his co-defendant in a federal fraud case and being the territory's witness is the difference between prison and walking away." She paused. "But that offer has a shelf life. Once Helena responds, and they will respond because I sent real documentation, Pruitt will start making sure everyone around him has more exposure than he does. That's what men like him do. She met his eyes. You know that. You've watched him do it. Sellers looked up. His face was a man doing the arithmetic of his own survival, and the numbers were coming up badly. I didn't forge anything, he said. Quiet, careful. I witnessed. That's different. Witnessed signatures that were obtained under duress, she said. In the eyes of a federal court, the distinction is, I know what the distinction is, he said sharply. Then he caught himself, looked at his plate again. I need assurances. I can't give you legal assurances. I'm not an attorney. She folded her hands on the counter. What I can give you is a witness to this conversation and a letter in my own hand to the territorial court stating that you cooperated voluntarily and early. She let him sit with that. That's worth something. Sellers was quiet for a long time. Cole said nothing. Didn't move. Let the silence do the work. The Ruth Calloway case, Sellers said finally at barely above a whisper. Her signature on the transfer document. She wasn't in the office when it was signed. He didn't look at either of them. I know that because I was there. Or rather, I wasn't. Nobody was. Except Pruitt and Crane. The air in the room changed. Cole's stillness beside her became a different kind of stillness, the kind that has something personal underneath it, held down by will. Will you put that in writing? Margaret asked. Sellers looked at her. If I do, he'll know it was me. He'll suspect it was you regardless, she said. The question is whether you're on record first or not. He looked at his lunch. He hadn't eaten any of it. He pushed the plate away slightly, the gesture of a man who has made a decision he can't unmake. Not here, he said. Not in town. If I sign something, it has to go directly to Helena. Not through Alderman, not through anyone local. Birch goes back onto the postal route day after tomorrow, Cole said from behind her. His voice was absolutely even. He can carry it. Sellers nodded. Once. I'll need until tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, Margaret agreed. They left him at the counter. They walked out of the saloon into the afternoon heat, and they were half a block down the street before Cole stopped walking. She stopped too. He was looking at the ground, not at anything, just at the ground, and his jaw was working the way it did when he was holding something down by force. Ruth wasn't in the office, he said. No, Margaret said quietly. She wasn't. She didn't sign. No. He was quiet. Then, which means the transfer is fraudulent. The stake she supposedly signed away was never legally transferred, she said. Cole. She said his name the same way he'd said hers earlier, just the name. No prefix, no ceremony. Whatever your sister left behind when she left Thornwood may still belong to her. He looked up. She had never seen him look uncertain before. Capable of pain, yes, she'd seen that in the set of his jaw when she'd mentioned Ruth before. But uncertain, no. He moved through the world with the sureness of someone who has decided not to want things, because wanting things opens a door to loss, and he'd learned the cost of that door a long time ago. But he looked uncertain now. We don't know where she is, he said. We find her, Margaret said. One thing at a time. First we stop Pruitt. Then we find Ruth. She looked at him steadily. You've been carrying this alone for 8 months. You don't have to anymore. He looked at her. It was the longest he'd ever looked at her directly, longer than the moment in the forge when he'd first turned around, longer than the map on the workbench, longer than any of the rides, or the judge's office, or the saloon. He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't let himself see clearly before, because seeing it clearly would require deciding what to do about it. Then he nodded, short, and looked away. We should check in with Alderman, he said. Make sure the stay's been formally recorded. Yes, she said. We should. They walked, side by side, which they'd been doing for days now, but something about it felt different, the way the same road can feel different depending on what you're carrying when you walk it. Alderman's office confirmed the stay was recorded and filed by 11 that morning. Pruitt had already sent a man to contest it, which the judge had declined to entertain until he received response from Helena, which he communicated with the impassive satisfaction of a man who doesn't often get to do the right thing and is enjoying it. They were leaving the judge's office when Dix, the younger rancher, came riding down the main street at a pace that drew eyes from every doorway on the block. He pulled up in front of Cole Horse, blowing face set. "Pruitt's men were at Halter's place this morning," he said. "Told him if he didn't retract his statement, they'd contest his water access over winter." He looked at Margaret. "Halter's a practical man. He's got cattle to feed." Margaret felt at the familiar shape of the pressure closing in. Pruitt couldn't stop the legal process, so he was going after the people who'd made it possible. "Is Halter going to retract?" Cole asked. "He hasn't yet, but he's scared." Dix looked at his hands. "I'm not going to lie to you either. A man came to see me this afternoon. Said some things about what happens to ranchers who involve themselves in legal disputes against well-connected land agents." He looked up. "I'm not backing out. I want you to know that. But I need to know this is going to work." Margaret looked at him. This young man with his signed statement and his honest face and his cattle to feed. "I can't promise you it works," she said. "I can tell you the truth. We have documentation, we have a witness inside Pruitt's operation who's about to cooperate, and we have a stay from the judge. We have more than we had 3 days ago." She paused. "I can also tell you that if you retract, Pruitt wins this round, and he learns that pressure works, and the next person he does this to will have even less help than I did." Dix was quiet. "My father lost a ranch to a man like Pruitt," he said. "Different state, same story." He picked up his reins. "I'll hold." He rode off. Cole watched him go. "You know if this falls apart, those men lose more than we do." "I know," she said. She felt the weight of it real and specific, not abstract. "Which is why it can't fall apart. Margaret." He stopped walking. She stopped too. He looked at her with those steady gray eyes, and his voice was quiet and direct, the way everything about him was quiet and direct. "What happens if the Helena filing gets delayed? If Pruitt finds a way to slow the response, the stay expires and he moves on the transfer, and Sellers loses his nerve, and we're standing here with paper, and no." "Then we find another way," she said. "That's not a plan." "No," she agreed. "It's not." She looked at him. "Do you have a better one?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "I've had 4 plans in 4 days," she said. 3 of them worked. One of them, the Connolly approach, worked better than I expected, because I was honest about the odds instead of pretending I had certainty I didn't have. She held his gaze. "I don't know what happens if this specific piece fails. I know that I will figure out the next step when we get there, because that's what I've been doing my whole life. And I know I'd rather figure it out with someone who tells me the truth than someone who tells me it's all fine when it isn't." She paused. "So yes, that's my plan. The next step, and then the one after that." He was quiet. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her outside the saloon, with that careful, searching attention that didn't have a name she could put on it exactly. "All right," he said, low, certain, like something settling. "All right," she said. They were 2 steps from the boarding house when the sound hit sharp and sudden and wrong, the crack of a single shot from the direction of the land office, followed by shouting, followed by the kind of running silence that means something has gone badly. They looked at each other. Cole was already moving. She ran to keep up with him, her carpetbag swinging, and they came around the corner onto the main street to find a knot of people in front of Pruitt's land office, and Aldous Crane standing in the doorway with his hands up and his face the color of flour. "Nobody's hurt," Crane was saying to no one in particular, to everyone. "It was an accident, it was—" Cole pushed through the crowd. Inside the land office, Hector Pruitt was standing behind his desk, a revolver on the floor beside his feet, and across from him, shaking but upright, was Horace Birch, the postal rider, the man they'd sent to Helena. He was back. He'd come back. And in his hand was not the documents they'd sent him with, but a sealed envelope with a territorial court stamp on the outside that Margaret could read from the doorway. She looked at Birch. "You went and came back," she said. "That's 3 days of riding in 2 days." he said, slightly indignant, despite the trembling. I pushed hard. He looked at Pruitt. And he was waiting for me when I got back, which tells you something about his network. He looked at Margaret. He tried to take the return correspondence. Margaret looked at Pruitt. Pruitt looked at her. That envelope, she said. Is that what I think it is? Birch crossed the room and put it in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. Official. Real. She opened it. The Territorial Land Office had received her filing. They had cross-referenced the deed registration. They were initiating a formal inquiry. A federal land commissioner would arrive in Thornwood within 14 days. 14 days. She looked up. Pruitt was still standing behind his desk. He looked like a man watching a wall he'd built fall down. Not immediately, not all at once, but the crack running through it. That means the end is no longer theoretical. Mr. Pruitt, she said, the federal land commissioner will be here in 2 weeks. You might want to use that time to speak with an attorney. Pruitt said nothing. She folded the letter and put it in her carpet bag with everything else and walked out into the summer heat with Cole behind her and Birch behind him, and the crowd parted without her asking it to, and she didn't look back. Cole fell into step beside her. 14 days, he said. 14 days, she agreed. Pruitt will spend every one of them trying to find a way out. He won't find one, she said. Not now that the territory is involved. They walked. Around them, Thornwood was doing what towns do when something has shifted, that particular low murmur of people recalibrating, deciding which way the wind was blowing and whether they'd bet on the right side. You're not celebrating, Cole said. Not yet. She kept walking. Sellers still needs to sign. Halter still needs to hold. The commissioner still needs to arrive and do his job. She glanced at him. There are 14 days left to hold this together. I know. His voice was quiet. I just meant you did something today that nobody in this town has managed in 2 years. She thought about that. About Thomas, patient and gone. About Ruth Calloway, who'd come here alone and signed a paper she shouldn't have signed and disappeared. About 12 cases in a tin box on a shelf. We did it, she said. Cole didn't answer, but she heard it, the thing he didn't say, the shift in the quiet beside her. And she thought that maybe in the language of a man who said very little, that was as close as he got to saying everything. The 14 days did not pass quietly. Pruitt understood with the clarity that comes to cornered men that his only remaining move was to make the ground unstable enough that nobody could stand on it long enough to testify. He couldn't stop the commissioner from coming. He couldn't undo what was already in Helena. What he could do was erode quietly, systematically, the way water erodes stone, one drip at a time, until the foundation gives. It started with Halter. On the 4th day, after Birch returned, George Halter rode into town and went directly to the boarding house and asked to speak with Margaret. She came downstairs to find him standing in Mrs. Henderson's front hall with his hat in both hands, and the look of a man who has not slept well and has decided to stop pretending otherwise. I need to talk to you, he said. I know, she said. Come in. She brought him into the small sitting room off the hall, and Mrs. Henderson appeared with coffee, as if by instinct, and disappeared again just as quickly, because she was the kind of woman who understood when a room needed to be private. Halter sat. He held the coffee without drinking it. They came back, he said. Not men this time, Pruitt himself. He looked at his hat. He sat in my kitchen, talked to my wife, talked about the hard winter coming, about how cattle prices were down, about how a man with a contested water arrangement might find it very difficult to make it through to spring. He stopped. He didn't threaten her directly. He never does it directly. But she was frightened. My wife doesn't frighten easy. Margaret kept her voice steady. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. Halter's jaw worked. I didn't retract. I want you to know that. But I told him I'd think about it, which is almost the same thing, and I've been feeling sick about it ever since. You haven't retracted, she said. That's what matters right now. For how long? He looked up, and there was something raw in it. the honest fear of a practical man who has cattle and a wife and a winter coming and has made a bet he's not sure he can afford. The commissioner isn't here yet. Sellers hasn't signed anything publicly. Pruitt's still in that office every day like nothing's changed. He leaned forward. Mrs. Avery, I need to know this is going to hold, not hope it will. No. She thought about what she'd said to Dix that she couldn't promise. She thought about the difference between honesty and the particular cruelty of giving a frightened man nothing to hold on to. Sellers signs tomorrow morning, she said. Witnessed by Judge Alderman and 2 other parties. Once that document goes to Birch, it's in transit to the commissioner before Pruitt can do anything about it. She looked at Halter steadily. And the commissioner is Federal George. Pruitt has county commissioners in his pocket. He doesn't have federal ones. She paused. Your statement doesn't have to be brave. It just has to be true. And it is true, isn't it? Halter looked at her. It's true. Then hold on 4 more days, she said. That's all I'm asking. He left without committing to anything outright. But he left without retracting either. And sometimes that's the only ground you get. Cole was waiting in the forge when she got back, working on a commission piece, but she could tell from the way he looked up the moment she walked in that he'd been listening for her footsteps. Halter, he asked, shaken, not broken. She sat down on the bench, and for a moment, she just let herself be tired, because she was tired the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding a complicated thing together through will alone and can feel the edges starting to strain. Pruitt went to his house, talked to his wife. Cole's jaw tightened. Low. It's effective, she said. That's why he does it. She looked at her hands. We need Sellers to sign tomorrow, not the day after. Tomorrow. I spoke to him this afternoon. Cole set down his hammer. He's ready. He's scared, but he's ready. Alderman will be there at 7. Is Alderman safe? She looked up. Pruitt hasn't. Nobody touches Alderman. Cole said it with quiet certainty. He's been in this valley 30 years. His wife is buried here. His son runs the schoolhouse. Even Pruitt understands there are lines that make everything worse if you cross them. He looked at her. Alderman is the one thing in this town that's solid. She nodded. Let herself believe that. How are you? Cole asked. It caught her off guard, not the words, but the directness of them. Cole asked questions when he needed information. He didn't, as a general rule, ask questions that were really about something else. I'm tired, she said honestly. I'm worried about Halter. I'm worried Sellers will lose his nerve between now and 7 tomorrow morning. I'm worried that 14 days isn't enough time for the commissioner to get here before Pruitt finds some angle I haven't seen yet. She looked at him. How are you? He was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about Ruth, he said. About the fact that she was in this town in this situation, and I was 40 miles north and didn't know. He picked up the hammer and put it back down without using it. I should have been paying more attention. You were paying attention, she said. You had 8 months of records on a shelf. You were watching the whole time. Watching isn't the same as stopping it. No, she agreed. It isn't. She looked at him. Cole, you couldn't have stopped it if you didn't have someone with a legal claim to fight from. You knew that. That's why you waited. She paused. Waiting when you don't have enough isn't failure. It's patience. Your sister would tell you that if she were here. He looked at her sharply. You don't know Ruth. No, but I know she's your sister, which means she knows you. And I've had a week to watch how you operate, and I don't think the people who matter to you would be confused about the difference between patience and abandonment. She held his gaze. You didn't abandon her. Pruitt stole from her and drove her out of town. Those are different things. The forge was quiet except for the coal settling. Cole looked at her for a long moment. That careful, still attention she'd stopped trying to decode and had started just accepting as the way he saw things that mattered to him. You do that a lot, he said. Do what? Say the thing that lands in the exact place it needs to. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it in the same place she'd been filing other things about Cole Whitfield, the second coffee cup. The way he'd said her name, without the misses. The fact that he'd waited 8 months for something to fight for, and had chosen immediately, and without apparent deliberation, to fight for her. "I say what I think," she said. "It's efficient." Something moved in his face, real and unguarded there for just a second before he picked his hammer back up. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's important." "I know." She stood. "Cole." She stopped at the doorway. "For what it's worth, whatever you think you should have done differently, you showed up. When I walked in here covered in dust with 2 men behind me, you showed up." She looked at him. "That's what people remember. Not the times you were 40 miles away, the times you were there." She left before he could answer. She thought climbing the stairs at the boarding house that she might not have been talking entirely about Ruth. She wasn't sure he didn't know that. Sellers signed at 7:15 the next morning. He signed in Judge Alderman's office in the presence of Alderman Cole and a notary that Alderman had brought in from the next town over, a woman named Agnes Price, who drove herself 20 miles in a wagon before breakfast and looked entirely unbothered by any of it. The document was 4 pages. Sellers's hand trembled slightly on the first page and steadied on the rest the way people do when they've committed to something, and the decision becomes calmer than the approach to it. He named Pruitt. He named Crane. He named the Ruth Calloway transfer specifically, and 3 others, and described in careful detail the process by which signatures were obtained or not obtained, and documents were finalized without all relevant parties present. When he finished, Alderman blotted the page and looked at Sellers over his glasses. "You understand this is a sworn statement," he said. "I understand," Sellers said. "And you're prepared to repeat this testimony before a federal commissioner." A pause, shorter than Margaret expected. "Yes," Sellers said. "I am." Birch was waiting outside. He had the document in a sealed case and was on his horse before the clock read 7:30. Margaret watched him ride north out of town and kept watching until he was gone from sight. And then she let out a breath that felt like it came from somewhere she'd been holding since she stepped off the noon stage 9 days ago. Cole appeared at her shoulder. "It's done?" she said. "That part is," he said, not dampening it, just being accurate. It was one of the things she'd come to rely on about him. What happened next came from a direction she hadn't watched. Crane found her, not with men this time, not with the smooth professional warmth of their first meeting. He found her alone on the main street at mid-morning, and he looked like a man who had not slept, whose careful presentation had frayed enough at the edges to show the person underneath, and that person was frightened. "I need to speak with you," he said, privately. She looked at him. She thought about calling for Cole, who was a block behind her at the forge. She decided against it. "Speak," she said. He looked at the people passing on the street, lowered his voice. "Sellers signed this morning. I know he did, because Pruitt knows he did, and Pruitt's office has been, it's not safe in there right now." He met her eyes, and there was nothing practiced about it anymore. "I'm not a forger. I'm not Sellers. What I did was facilitate introductions between Pruitt and incoming claimants. I introduced him to people, and I told myself the legal matters weren't my concern." He stopped. "I told myself that for 2 years. "And now," she said, "now I want to know if there's still room on the other side of this." He said it plainly. No performance. "I'll tell you everything I know about how Pruitt identified targets, how he knew when estates had out-of-town heirs, who gave him the information." He paused. "There's a clerk at the county death registry who's been selling him names." Margaret felt it, the sudden widening of the whole picture, the thing she hadn't known she was missing. "The death registry," she said. "He's been buying names and estate information for a year and a half. That's how he knew about your husband. That's how he found Gerald Avery to use as a lure." Crane's voice was low and even. "That clerk is still in his office right now. If the commissioner comes and only looks at the land office, he might miss it." She looked at Crane for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Sellers signed, which means the sworn record exists, and Pruitt knows it. And this morning he started talking about how much exposure Crane and Sellers have, and how he personally was misled by subordinates." He looked at her steadily. He's building the case that we acted without him. And if that story takes hold before the commissioner gets here. You need to be on record first, she said. Yes, she thought about it. About the shape of Pruitt's operation, how much wider it was than 12 cases and a water rights scheme, how many rooms it had that she hadn't walked into yet. Go to Alderman, she said. Today, this afternoon. Tell him what you told me. The death registry clerk, the names, all of it. She met his eyes. The judge will know how to record it properly. Will it help me? It'll help you more than silence will, she said. Which is the honest answer. He nodded, pulled his hat down, walked toward the judge's office. She turned and walked back to the forge, and when she came through the door, Cole looked up from his work and read her face in the way he'd gotten very good at over 9 days of being in the same rooms as her. What happened? He said. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was characteristic, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment. The death registry, he said. That's how Pruitt knew about Ruth. His voice was level. Somebody sold him my sister's name. Yes, she said. He set down his hammer. He looked at his hands, and she watched him do something she hadn't seen him do before. She watched him be angry. Really angry. Not the controlled tightness she'd seen when he talked about Pruitt's methods, but something older and more personal that moved across his face and then got put away with a visible act of will. When this is done, he said. When this is done, she agreed. We find the clerk. We find out what else was sold and to whom. And we find Ruth. He nodded. Once. Hard. Then he picked up his hammer and went back to work because Cole Whitfield dealt with things he couldn't act on yet the way he dealt with everything, by working steadily until the moment when he could. The commissioner arrived on day 11. His name was Warren Hale, and he was a compact, efficient man in his 50s, who had clearly spent a long time doing a job that required him to walk into towns where people were lying to him and figure out which things were true. He had 2 deputies and a court recorder, and he set up an alderman's office which Alderman offered, and Hale accepted without the particular performance of gratitude that means someone is trying to make an impression. He was not there to make impressions. He was there to work. He interviewed Margaret first for 2 hours, and she laid out everything in the order she'd learned it, with the documentation, the deed number, the statements, the seller's affidavit, and Crane's voluntary account of the death registry connection. She did not editorialize. She did not ask for sympathy. She presented facts and let them carry their own weight. Hale listened without expression. He asked precise questions. He wrote nothing down himself. The recorder did that, but his eyes were active in the way of someone storing information in a particular order. When she finished, he looked at her. You've been in Thornwood 11 days, he said. Yes. And you compiled this in 11 days. I had help. She looked at him. Cole Whitfield. He'd been collecting records for 8 months before I arrived. Hale made a note of that. I'll need to speak with him. He'll be at the forge. Of course he will, Hale said, with the faint dry edge of a man who has met a lot of Cole Whitfields over the years and has learned that they are always exactly where they said they would be. He interviewed Cole for 90 minutes. She didn't sit in on it. Cole hadn't asked her to, and she hadn't offered, but she was at the forge when Cole came back because she'd taken to spending her days there by now, in the way you take to a place that has become the steady center of a time that has had very little steadiness in it. How was he? She asked. Thorough. Cole poured himself water. He asked about the 8 months of records, how I compiled them, whether any of it was obtained improperly. Was it? No. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. Everything in that box was public record or voluntary conversation. I told him that. He set the cup down. He believed me. How do you know? Because he stopped asking that line of questions and moved to the next one. Cole sat down on the bench, the same bench she sat on every morning, the one she'd come to think of as hers, without formally claiming it. He's going to move on Pruitt's office this afternoon. Formal seizure of records. She absorbed that. Pruitt knows it's coming. Pruitt knew it was coming the moment Birch rode north. Cole looked at his hands. The question is, what he's done with the time he had. What Pruitt had done, they found out 2 hours later, was remove 11 files from the land office. Hale's deputies discovered it during the record seizure, empty folders filed, in order the names still on the tabs, the contents gone. Hale came to find Margaret personally to tell her which she thought said something about the way he operated. 11 files, he said. Not the Ruth Calloway file, not the Avery file, 11 others. He's protecting cases that haven't been formally reported yet, she said. Cases that aren't in what I sent you. That's my read as well. Hale looked at her. It also means there are 11 more claimants who don't know they're part of this. She thought about that. About 11 more people somewhere in the territory who'd signed papers or had papers signed for them and had walked away thinking it was over. I need to know their names, she said. So do I, Hale said. Which means I need Pruitt to think he's ahead of us long enough to make a mistake. She looked at him. You have a plan. I have an approach, he said. I'm going to interview Pruitt tomorrow morning, formally with the recorder. I'm going to let him believe that the missing files are a significant gap in our case. He paused. Men who think they've found a gap tend to walk right through it. She understood. You want him to talk about the 11 cases. I want him to explain why 11 files are empty in a way that either convicts him or gives me enough thread to pull. Hale looked at her steadily. I'm telling you this because you've earned the right to know. Not because I need anything from you at this stage. It was the most direct professional respect anyone had shown her since Thomas died, and she felt it land somewhere real. Thank you, she said. Hale left. She sat in the forge, which was quiet, because Cole had banked the fire for the evening, and she thought about 11 people. 11 files. 11 doors Pruitt had tried to close before anyone found the room. Cole came back from walking Hale to Alderman's office and found her sitting exactly where he'd left her. He sat down across from her, not on her bench on the stool by the anvil the way he sat when he was working through something. You know what bothers me most, she said. Tell me. I almost didn't come. She looked at her hands. I had the letter for a week before I bought the stage fare. I almost let it go. $42 and nowhere to put it, and I almost decided Thornwood was too far and too uncertain and let Pruitt have Thomas's stake without ever knowing what it was. She paused. 11 other people probably made that calculation and lost. You're not responsible for them, Cole said. I know. She looked up. But they're real. And they're out there somewhere thinking it's over. She held his gaze. When this is done, the commissioner, the ruling, all of it, those 11 cases need to be found. Someone needs to write to those people and tell them what happened. I'll help you find them, he said. I know you will. She said it simply without making a production of the certainty in it. But it was certain, and she thought he heard that. He was looking at her again, that long, careful look. Margaret. He said her name and then stopped, which was unusual for him. Cole Whitfield said things when he had something to say. He didn't start sentences and stop them. What? She said. He looked at the floor, looked back at her. He seemed to be choosing between two different versions of something. When this is over, he said, what do you do? She understood what he was asking. She heard the whole question in the short one. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I have 12 acres of mountain with a creek. I have a legal claim to it. She paused. I've never run land before. I've never lived in Montana. I don't know the first thing about cattle. She looked at him. What I know is how to learn and how to ask the right people the right questions. Silence. There's a house on the Avery property, Cole said. Hasn't been used, but it's standing. Thomas had it built in 1885. He said it carefully, not looking at her. It would need work. Most things worth having need work, she said. He looked up. She held his gaze and let him read whatever he needed to read there because she was tired of filing things away to figure out later, and some things were better said by not being hidden. I know how to do that kind of work, he said, quietly. I know you do, she said. The forge was quiet. Outside Thornwood was doing its evening business horses, voices the sound of the saloon starting up. The ordinary sounds of a place that was about to change, and didn't entirely know it yet. "The hearing is in 2 days," she said. 2 days, he agreed. "A lot can still go wrong." "Yes," he said. "It can. But it probably won't." She looked at him. "You know why?" "Tell me." "Because Pruitt has been winning by making sure people didn't know they had a fight," she said. "And everyone in this valley knows now. Halter knows, Dix knows. Connolly signed, Sellers signed, Crane signed. Alderman issued a stay. The commissioner is in that office right now reading 8 months of your records." She paused. "You can't unring a bell, Cole." He ran out of quiet. Something in his face shifted, opened slightly, in the way things open when a weight has been on them a long time and is finally being lifted. "You rang it," he said. "We rang it," she said. Pruitt walked into the commissioner's formal hearing the next morning with his attorney and his best suit, and his practiced warmth fully reconstructed as if the previous 11 days had been a misunderstanding. He was graciously arriving to clear up. He sat down across from Hale and folded his hands on the table and smiled. "Commissioner," he said, "I understand there's been some concern about my office's record keeping. I'm happy to address any confusion." Hale looked at him. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Pruitt. I'd like to start with the 11 files that are currently empty in your land office." The warmth didn't break, but something behind it recalculated. "A clerical matter," Pruitt said. "Those files were transferred to secure storage pending the legal questions raised by Mrs. Avery's visit. I can produce them." "Where is secure storage?" Hale asked. "My personal office, at my residence." "I'll need those files this afternoon," Hale said. "If they're not produced by 3 o'clock, I'll issue a warrant for the property." The warmth slipped, just slightly, just enough. "Of course," Pruitt said. "Of course. I'll have them sent immediately." He would not have them sent immediately. Both he and Hale knew that, but the agreement was on record, which meant the failure to produce would also be on record, and Pruitt had just walked through the gap. Margaret was not in the hearing room. She was at the forge because Cole had work, and she had learned that waiting is easier when you're near something that sounds like certainty. She was there when Alderman's clerk came with the news at 10:30. "Pruitt's attorney just came to the judge's office," the clerk said. "Filed a motion to dismiss on grounds of jurisdictional overreach. Says the commissioner doesn't have authority in county land matters." Cole looked up from his work. Margaret looked at the clerk. "What did Alderman say?" The clerk, who was 20 years old and clearly delighted to be delivering this particular message, grinned. "He said the Territorial Charter of 1882 specifically grants federal oversight on all land claim disputes involving deceased estate holders and out-of-state heirs." Then he cited the specific statute. He paused. Then he told the attorney to read more carefully before filing paperwork in his office. Cole made a sound that was very nearly a laugh. Margaret put her hand over her mouth and did not quite manage to contain what might have been the first real laugh she'd had in 4 months. The motion was denied within the hour. At 3 o'clock, Pruitt did not produce the 11 files. At 3:15, Hale issued the warrant. At 4 o'clock, the deputies returned with a strongbox that had been found in a locked cabinet in Pruitt's study, and inside it were not 11 files, but 4 more cases than the empty folders had suggested. 4 more people whose names were on documents in a box a man had been hiding in his house. Hale sent for Margaret. She stood in Alderman's office and looked at 15 folders on the judge's desk and felt something enormous and complicated move through her grief for the people in those files, anger at the years it had taken, and underneath both of those, something quieter and more durable. The satisfaction of a thing completed. "The Avery claim will be formally recognized in the ruling," Hale said. "I'll have a full determination within 5 days. Pruitt and his associates will be held for federal proceedings." He paused. "The Ruth Calloway transfer will be flagged for review as a fraudulent conveyance. If the property can be traced and the claimant located—" "I'll find her," Margaret said. "Tell me where to look and I'll find her." Hale looked at her. "You're staying in Thornwood, Mrs. Avery?" It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." She walked back to the forge in the long evening light, and Cole was banking the fire for the night, and he looked up when she came in with the particular attention he always gave her, immediate, complete, like she was the thing in the room worth looking at. "It's done," she said. "Or the beginning of done." He set down the poker. "The files. 15 cases. Hale has all of it." She crossed the floor and sat on her bench. The word had become automatic. Her bench, which told her something about how quickly a person can settle into a place that fits them. "Ruth's transfer is flagged. They'll review it." Cole didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the banked fire. "I thought I'd feel different," he said, "when it got this far." "How do you feel?" He thought about it. "Like something I've been carrying put itself down," he said. "But I haven't decided yet what to do with my hands." She understood that exactly. "I know what that feels like," she said. "I've felt it every morning since April." She looked at him. "It gets better. You find things to do with your hands." She paused. "Or someone gives you a list." He looked at her. "I have a house that needs work," she said. "On 12 acres of mountain with a creek." She held his gaze. "I wasn't kidding about not knowing the first thing about cattle." The forge was quiet. Outside, Thornwood was settling into its evening. Inside, a man who had spent years believing he had nothing left to offer was looking at a woman who saw him clearly enough to ask anyway. "You'd need someone who knows the land," he said, carefully. "I would," she agreed. "And the cattle market, and how to winterize a property on the upper range." "All of that," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "I know someone," he said. She smiled. She couldn't help it, real and unguarded, the way she hadn't smiled at anyone in months. "I thought you might," she said. Hale's formal ruling came on the 5th day as promised. Margaret was at the boarding house when the commissioner's clerk brought the envelope, and she read it at Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table, with the old woman sitting across from her, pretending to sort linen, but not actually moving any of it. The Avery stake was formally recognized. The debt claim was declared fraudulent and void. The 15 cases in Pruitt's strongbox were flagged for individual review and restitution proceedings. Hector Pruitt and Aldous Crane were remanded to federal custody pending trial. The county death registry clerk, a man named Foss, who had sold names for 18 months at $5 a name, had been arrested that morning before breakfast, which Hale had timed deliberately. Margaret suspected, because hungry men confess faster. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her carpet bag with Thomas's deed number and the 3 signed statements and the letter that had brought her here, because all of those things belonged together. They were the shape of what had happened, and she intended to keep the shape of it. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said, not looking up from the linen she wasn't sorting. "It's done," Margaret said. Mrs. Henderson put down the linen. She looked at Margaret with eyes that had seen a considerable amount of the world and had opinions about most of it. And the Avery stake is mine." She paused. "Legally, completely, without encumbrance." "And," Mrs. Henderson said again, with the particular patience of a woman who is asking about something that isn't the land. Margaret looked at her. "He's going to help me work it." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts have been vindicated. "Good," she said, and picked up her linen again. "I was beginning to think that man was going to work himself to death in that forge and call it a life." Margaret thought about that, about Cole in the forge, 8 months of waiting, the tin box on the shelf. About a man who had decided somewhere along the way that wanting things was a door that only led to loss, and had made a very thorough job of closing it. She thought about what it meant that he was opening it again. She went to the forge. He looked up when she came in, and she could tell from the particular quality of his attention that he'd been waiting for the envelope for the ruling, for the word that would make everything they'd built over 15 days into something permanent, rather than something that might still collapse. She put the ruling on the workbench between them. He read it. He read it the way he did everything completely without rushing, giving each line the weight it was owed. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Foss," he said. "The clerk. Arrested this morning." "He sold Ruth's name," Cole said. Not a question. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Which means there's a record. Hale's office will have the full list of names Foss sold. Ruth's will be on it with the date and the amount and who he sold it to." She paused. "That's a thread we can pull, Cole. A real one." He looked at the ruling again. His jaw worked once, that familiar motion of something being held down by will, and then steadied. "Hale's leaving day after tomorrow," he said. "I know. I need to speak with him today about Ruth's case specifically. Get the information formalized before he goes." She looked at Cole. "Come with me." "He doesn't need me there for that." "No," she agreed. "But I do." He looked at her. There it was again, that open, unguarded moment that lasted just long enough to be real before he picked up his hammer and set it back down and reached for his hat. They went together. Hale was methodical about Ruth's case in the way he was methodical about everything. He confirmed that Foss's records showed the sale of Ruth Calloway's name listed as a widowed heir to a small Montana property claim in March of 1886. Sold to Pruitt's operation for $7. $7 for a woman's legal rights and her reason to stay. The fraudulent transfer document bore a signature that sellers had already attested was not obtained in person. With that affidavit and the Foss records together, Ruth Calloway's original property interest was legally intact. It had never been validly transferred. "The property itself," Hale said, looking at the file. "It's been sitting unoccupied. Pruitt never developed it too small to be worth the trouble once he had the water rights scheme running on the Avery parcel." He looked up at Cole. "Your sister's claim is recoverable." Cole was very still. "What does she need to do?" he asked. "Present herself to a territorial land office with identification and the case number I'll assign to this file." Hale paused. "You need to find her first." "I know," Cole said. "I will." Hale looked at him for a moment. The assessing look of a man who has learned to read the difference between bravado and certainty, and then nodded once. "I'll leave the file with Alderman," he said. "Open and active. When she's found, tell her to write to my office in Helena first. I'll make sure it's expedited." He closed the folder. "Mr. Whitfield, you've kept an honest record in a dishonest town for 8 months, and you've done it without overreaching or compromising the evidentiary value of anything you collected." He said it plainly, without ceremony. "That's not a small thing." Cole didn't say anything. But something in his face received it, not with the deflection of a man who doesn't believe he deserves credit, but with the quiet of a man who is deciding to let it in. "Thank you," he said. They walked out into the summer afternoon, and Thornwood felt different. Margaret had been noticing it for 2 days, the particular change in a place when something that has been wrong for a long time is corrected. Not transformed, not suddenly good. Just corrected the way a crooked thing can be straightened without becoming new. The same buildings, the same dust, the same heat pressing down. But people looked up differently when they passed. Dix had tipped his hat to her that morning from across the street with the particular relief of a man who'd held his nerve and been right to. Even Connolly Pruitt's cousin by marriage had stopped her outside the general store to say with the stiff dignity of a man who doesn't apologize easily that he was glad she hadn't left. She was glad she hadn't left either. She told Cole that on the walk back from Hale's office, and he said quietly, "So am I." And they left it at that, because some things don't need to be said in more words than that. The work on the Avery property started 3 days later. Cole rode up with her the first morning, and they walked the 12 acres together, the boundary posts, the creek, the house Thomas had built in 1885 that was solid in its bones, but had spent 2 years proving it didn't need anyone. It needed work, the kind of work that had nothing to do with difficulty and everything to do with time and attention. Cole walked through the house without saying much. He looked at the roof, tested the floorboards, examined the window frames and the fireplace and the water line from the creek. He did it the way he did everything methodically, completely, without dramatizing the problems or minimizing them. 2 weeks for the structural work, he said, coming back out. Another week for the interior. I can do most of it myself if you handle the materials. I can handle materials, she said. The window on the east side needs to be replaced, not repaired. All right. The fireplace needs repointing. I can do that. Cole. She stopped him. He looked at her. I've done some work myself. I'm not just going to hand you a list and watch. He looked at her for a moment. Something like amusement, real not performed, moved across his face. All right, he said. Tell me what needs to be done, and I'll do the half I'm capable of. And the half you're not capable of yet. You'll teach me, she said. Like the ranchers. Like the water rights. Like everything else I didn't know when I got here. She looked at him steadily. I learn fast when someone doesn't condescend to me. I've noticed, he said, and there was that almost smile more fully present than she'd ever seen it. They worked. It was not romantic exactly. It was too real for that, too full of dust and physical effort, and the occasional disagreement about the right way to do a thing. She learned to use a level. She learned which wood to trust and which to replace. She learned that Cole had strong opinions about the way joints should be fitted, that he was unable to fully articulate in words, but demonstrated with a patience that didn't read as teaching, because it didn't come with any sense that he thought she ought to already know. On the 4th morning of work, she was up on the porch roof, replacing shingles, while Cole worked on the window frame below, and Mrs. Henderson came up the mountain in a wagon with a covered basket and the expression of a woman who is combining errand and surveillance and is not embarrassed about either. She looked at Margaret on the roof. She looked at Cole at the window. She looked at the progress made. Lunch, she said, setting the basket on the porch rail. And before you tell me you don't need feeding, I know what you've both been eating up here, and it is insufficient. She looked at Cole specifically when she said it in the way of a woman who has been feeding a man insufficiently for years, and has decided to stop tolerating it. Cole opened his mouth. Sit down, Mrs. Henderson said. He sat down. Margaret climbed down from the roof and sat beside him, and Mrs. Henderson laid out lunch with the efficiency of a woman who doesn't waste motion, and then stood back and looked at them both, sitting in the summer air with the half-repaired house behind them, and the creek running below. Your husband would have liked this, she said to Margaret, quietly, not as a wound, as a gift. Margaret felt it move through her. Yes, she said. He would have. She looked at the creek. He never told me about this place. I think he meant it as a surprise. It is a surprise, Mrs. Henderson said. Just not the one he planned. She picked up her basket. I'll bring supper if you're still here at 6. We'll be here, Cole said. Mrs. Henderson looked at him with the careful satisfaction of a woman who has wanted exactly that answer for a long time. She drove back down the mountain. Cole and Margaret ate in the quiet of the summer afternoon, and the work and the food and the ordinary specific weight of a real day settled around them, and Margaret thought about Thomas again. Not with the sharp grief of the first weeks, but with the softer ache of someone who is learning that you can carry love for a person who is gone, and love for the life that comes after, and they do not diminish each other. They exist in different rooms of the same house, and you can walk between them. She thought Thomas would have understood that. She thought he probably would have liked Cole Whitfield, which felt important, though she couldn't have explained why to anyone else, and didn't try to. Can I ask you something? She said. You generally do, Cole said. She smiled at that. Ruth, before she came to Thornwood, were you close? He thought about it. We didn't grow up together. Different fathers, different households. We found each other when we were adults. He looked at the creek. She came to find me when she was 23. I was working a ranch in Wyoming. She just showed up one day like it was a natural thing to do, like we'd been in the same town our whole lives. Something warm moved in his voice, private and careful, the warmth of a man who keeps the things he loves in a protected place. She stayed 2 months. Then she got a property letter and headed north, and I was stupid enough to think she'd be fine. Bon, omindi maka mai mimhine. She was looking for something to build, Margaret said. The same as you, the same as me. Yes. He was quiet. She deserved to find it. She still can, Margaret said. The claim is intact. Hale has the file. When we find her. When we find her, Cole said firmly. Not if. When. When we find her, Margaret agreed. She'll have something to come back to. He looked at her. What, she said. Nothing. He looked back at the creek. Just you said she'll have something to come back to. Not I'll help you find her, not if she wants it. You said she'll have something to come back to. He paused. Like you've already decided you're part of that. She considered it. Is that wrong? A long silence. The kind that Cole Whitfield used when he was deciding something real. No, he said. It's not wrong. She nodded. Picked up the last of her lunch. Then let's finish that window before the light goes. He stood. He looked at her for a moment, and this time it was different from all the other times he'd looked at her, because this time there was nothing being held back or filed away. It was just him looking at her with everything he was thinking right there on the surface of it. Margaret, he said. Cole, she said. I'm not Thomas, he said. I don't have what he had, the patience, the planning, the way of making things feel safe before they are. He said it straight without apology, like a man reading out an inventory. I'm someone who works iron and keeps records and doesn't talk enough and spent 8 months being angry at something I couldn't fix. I know who you are, she said. I'm telling you anyway, because you deserve to know exactly what this... He stopped, started again. I don't want you to stay because the land is here. I want you to stay because you want to be here. And I need those to be different things. She looked at him. This man who told the truth because he thought lying was an insult to people's intelligence. Who had put himself between her and 2 men she'd never met because something in the room had required it. Who had kept a tin box on a shelf for 8 months out of love for a sister he couldn't find. And who had waited patiently, steadily, without complaint, for the moment when waiting became something else. Thomas made me feel safe, she said. And I loved him for it. I will love him for it for the rest of my life. She looked at Cole steadily. You make me feel capable, like I'm not something to be protected from the world, but someone who can walk into it and handle what's there. She paused. Do you understand that those are both love different shapes of it, but the same thing underneath? He was very still. I'm not replacing him, she said. And I'm not settling. And I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go. She let him see that she meant it. I'm staying because when I walked into your forge covered in road dust with 2 men behind me, you looked at me like I was someone who could handle my own situation. And nobody had looked at me like that in years. Her voice was steady. I'm staying because you showed me what 12 acres of mountain looks like and didn't tell me what to do with it. And I'm staying because I think we could build something here that's real, not perfect, not easy, real. Cole looked at her for a long time. All right, he said. His voice was low and certain the way it was when he'd said she was with him to the men in the doorway, the way it was when he'd told Pruitt he was part of it, the way it always was when he meant something completely. All right, she said. He reached out carefully like a man handling something he's deciding to trust, and took her hand briefly the way you shake hands on something that matters. Except that he didn't let go immediately. He held it for a moment, and she let him, and then they both went back to work, because that's who they were, and the window wasn't going to finish itself. They found Ruth 6 weeks later. It was Birch who found her, or found word of her. He had the particular network of a man who has spent years on postal routes and knows every postmaster in a territory, and isn't above asking them things. She had gone north after Thornwood, then east, and had settled in a small town outside of Billings, where she was working as a seamstress and had been there for 8 months, trying to decide if she was going to stay. Cole wrote her a letter. Margaret helped him with it. Not the words which were his own, but the order of them, because she had learned that Cole sometimes needed someone to tell him it was all right to say the thing he actually meant. He told Ruth about Pruitt's arrest. He told her about her property claim and Hale's file. He told her the transfer had been fraudulent and her interest was intact. He told her she had something to come back to if she wanted it. He told her about Margaret. He didn't make a production of it. He said, "I've been working the Avery property with the woman who came to Thornwood and broke Pruitt's operation. Her name is Margaret. I think you'd like her. She says to tell you the creek is clear all the way through summer, and the house has a good east window now." Ruth wrote back in 11 days. Her letter was 2 pages densely written in handwriting that Margaret could see immediately was nothing like Cole's quick and expressive, where his was precise. She wrote the way a person talks when they haven't had anyone to talk to in a while. She wrote about the seamstress work and the town outside Billings, and the way she'd been feeling for 8 months, like a person who had been set down in the wrong place and couldn't find the thread back. And then she wrote, "Tell me more about the creek." Cole read that line 3 times. Margaret watched him read it and watched what happened in his face, the slow, complete opening of something that had been closed for a very long time. Not dramatic, just real. Just a man who had been carrying something alone for 8 months, setting it down in the presence of someone who was glad to see him do it. "She's coming," he said. "I know," Margaret said. "She wants to see the property." "I know." She looked at him. "Cole, she's coming because you asked her to, because you wrote her the truth and didn't try to manage what she felt about it." She paused. That's what people need, someone to tell them the truth and let them decide. He looked at the letter. "I should have done it sooner. Written to more postmasters. Found her faster." "You found her," she said. "That's what matters." He looked up. "Stop counting what you did wrong," she said, "and let yourself have this." It was the most direct she'd been with him about anything that wasn't the case, or the property, or the practical business of the fight, and she could see it land not harshly, but solidly, the way true things land. "You're very difficult to argue with," he said. "I've been told," she said. "By who?" "You," repeatedly, in the form of not arguing with me. She looked at him. "Which tells me something." The almost smile became a real one. Full unhurried, the smile of a man who has decided to stop treating happiness like something that has to be earned before it's allowed. It was the best thing she'd seen in months, maybe longer. Ruth arrived on a Thursday in early September on the noon stage, and Cole was there to meet it. Margaret stood back because this was his, and she understood the difference between being present for someone and being in the way of their moment. She watched from the boardwalk in front of Mrs. Henderson's as the stage stopped and the door opened, and a woman stepped down who was nothing like what she'd expected, and exactly what she should have expected. Small. Where Cole was, large, expressive. Where he was still with his same eyes, but wearing them differently openly, looking at everything in front of her with the particular hunger of someone who has been looking away from things for too long. She saw Cole and stopped. He stood. They looked at each other, the way people look at each other when they've been frightened, they'd lost something, and are confronted with the fact that they haven't. Ruth crossed the distance between them and put her arms around him. And Cole, who did not, in the ordinary course of things, show people what was in the center of him, put his arms around his sister and held on. And Margaret looked at the street and gave them that. When she looked back, Ruth was looking at her over Cole's shoulder. "You're Margaret," she said. "I am," Margaret said. "He said you'd be here." He was right. She crossed the street and stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak normally. "Welcome back." Ruth Calloway looked at her, measuring direct her brother's eyes, doing her brother's thing, which was seeing clearly and not pretending otherwise. "The creek," Ruth said. "He said it's clear all summer. Cold enough to make your teeth ache," Margaret said, "even in August." Something in Ruth's face settled, released. "I missed it," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady on it. "I told myself I didn't all those months. Told myself Thornwood was just a bad idea, and I was better off. She stopped. But I missed the water. It's yours, Margaret said. The property's intact. Hale's file is open in Alderman's office with your name on it. You just have to go claim it. Ruth looked at her. Why did you fight for it? For all of it, the other cases, the people you'd never met. You didn't have to. You could have just taken the Avery claim and left. It was a real question. It deserved a real answer. Because Pruitt built his operation on the assumption that people who come to this valley alone and scared will make the easiest choice, Margaret said. And I wanted him to be wrong about that, not just for me, for everyone he'd made that calculation about. She paused. And because your brother stood between me and two men he didn't know when I walked into his forge, and I thought the least I could do was stand in the same direction. Ruth looked at Cole, back at Margaret. 8 months, she said to Cole. You had 8 months of records on a shelf, and you waited. I needed someone with a claim, Cole said. You could have written to me, Ruth said. You could have asked me to come back. Cole was quiet for a moment. You were safe, I thought. He looked at her. I thought you were somewhere being safe, and I didn't want to. He stopped. You didn't want to pull me back into something that hurt me, Ruth said. Yes. Ruth looked at him for a long time. Then she reached up and put her hand flat against his jaw, the way siblings sometimes do, a gesture that's older than words, that knows a person from the inside. You big, dumb, stubborn man, she said with enormous tenderness. I know, Cole said. Next time you have a plan that involves not telling me something for 8 months. I'll tell you, he said. You'd better. She dropped her hand and looked at Margaret. Is he always like this? Mostly, Margaret said. He gets better about it. I'm standing right here, Cole said. Yes, you are, both women said at the same moment, and looked at each other, and something passed between them. Immediate easy. The particular recognition of two people who are going to understand each other. And Ruth laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that comes from relief as much as humor. The laugh of someone setting something down they've been carrying too long. The three of them walked up the main street of Thornwood together past the land office, where the windows were dark and the door was locked, and someone had already begun removing Pruitt's name from the glass, past the forge, where the hammer would start again tomorrow morning, past Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, where the old woman stood at the window and watched them pass with the expression of a woman who has bet on the right horse and is not too dignified to look satisfied about it. The days that followed were the beginning of a different kind of ordinary. Ruth filed her claim the following Monday in Alderman's office with Hale's case number and the deed reference, and her own name written in her quick, expressive hand, and Alderman processed it with the efficiency of a man who has been waiting to do something just for 8 months. Her property was formally returned, small, adjacent to the Avery stake. The creek ran past the corner of both properties. Margaret, because she was Margaret, had already thought about what that meant in terms of water access and grazing rights, and the practical shape of two women running adjacent land in a valley where water was everything. She laid it out for Ruth at Mrs. Henderson's table over supper on the second night, and Ruth, who was quick and direct and took information the same way her brother did completely, and without needing it, softened, leaned forward and said, "Show me the map." Cole watched them work through it and said almost nothing, because he was a man who knew the difference between help and getting in the way, and he had learned that neither of these two women needed him to run anything for them. What they needed occasionally was for someone to hand them the right tool without being asked. He did that, and found quietly and without much ceremony that it was enough. More than enough. The most he'd been in a long time. On the last Friday of September, Margaret went up to the Avery house. Her house. She'd started saying it that way deliberately, letting it be true, and stood in the east room, with the new window that let in the morning light, and thought about Thomas. She thought about him the way she'd learned to with love, and without the weight of unpaid debt, because she had stopped owing him grief months ago, and had started simply carrying him the way you carry people who mattered, which is lightly and always. She thought about what he'd planned when he filed this claim in 1884. What he'd been building toward. What he'd imagined the surprise would look like when he finally brought her here. She thought it probably hadn't looked exactly like this. She thought he would have been glad about it anyway. Cole appeared in the doorway behind her. He'd been working on the fence line and had come up to the house for water, and he stopped when he saw her standing in the east light because he always stopped when he was reading a room before he entered it. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. He came in and stood beside her and looked at the light coming through the window he'd built. Didn't say anything about it. Didn't need to. "Ruth's coming up tomorrow," she said, "to look at the south fence line with me." "I know," she told me. "She has opinions about fencing," Margaret said. "She has opinions about everything," Cole said. "Always has." "I like her. She likes you." He looked at her sidelong. "She told me last night you're the most straightforward person she's met in years. Coming from her family, that's high praise." The almost smile fully real, now she'd stopped thinking of it as almost anything. "It is," he agreed. She looked at the window. The light was the particular gold of early fall, the last of the summer heat gone soft at the edges. The creek was audible from here just barely if the air was still. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not the way you think I want." "I always answer honestly," he said. "I know. That's why I'm asking." She looked at him. "When you look at this, the house, the land, the creek, all of it, what do you see?" He was quiet for a long moment, not hesitating, just giving it the attention it deserved. "A place that was waiting," he said, "for someone to come back to it and decide it was worth the work." He looked at her. "I see that happening." "And us," she said. Direct. Clear. She'd never learned to do it any other way, and had stopped trying. He looked at her with everything open, no walls, no careful management of what he let show. Just Cole Whitfield telling the truth because he thought lying was an insult to people's intelligence. "I see the rest of my life," he said, "if you'll have it that way." She had known it was coming, had known it the way you know something that has been true for a while before you say it out loud. And still hearing it simple and direct, and without flourish, which was the only way this man knew how to mean something, she felt it move through her completely. "I will," she said. He reached out and took her hand, not briefly this time, not the way you shake hands on a deal, the way you hold something you've decided to keep. She held on. Outside, the creek ran clear and cold over the mountain stones past the boundary posts of 12 acres that belonged to her, toward the valley, where a town was learning to be honest again, and a woman was learning to come home, and a blacksmith who had spent years believing he had nothing left to offer had discovered slowly, and with the particular stubbornness of someone who learns things by doing them, that he had been wrong about that from the beginning. He had always had something to offer. He had just needed someone brave enough to walk through his door and stay.